41 days before the first snow fell on the Cartwright homestead, Lydia Cartwright hired a stranger off the road for one season and told herself that was all she would ever need from him. She had not planned to hire anyone. Plans had a way of curling at the edges out here in southern Montana, the way paper did when you held it too close to the lamp. Her husband Thomas had died in March, 2 years prior, and she had managed the 60 acres herself since then, with the help of her boy Eli, who was 8 years old and earnest about everything he attempted, including tasks that were far too large for his small hands. She had managed. That was the word she used when the preacher asked, and when the storekeeper's wife, Mrs. Halloran, asked in that tilted, pitying way she had. She managed. But by the time September rolled down out of the mountains, cold and gray and smelling of pine resin, Lydia Cartwright had to look at the fence line and the woodpile and the unplanted winter rye and admit, privately, that managing was not the same as thriving. The man appeared on the road at just past noon on a Tuesday, walking north with a bedroll slung across his back and a hat pulled low against the wind. He was tall enough that she noticed him from the kitchen window before he reached the gate, and she wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, not because she was afraid, but because a woman alone on 60 acres had to be the one who spoke first. That was simply how it was. He stopped at the fence post the way a man stops when he is accustomed to being told to move on. Not sullen about it, just prepared. "I've got fence that won't last the winter," she called across the yard. "A woodpile that won't either, and rye that ought to be in the ground before the month is out." He looked at the fence. He looked at the woodpile. Then he looked at her. "I can do all three," he said. His name was Jonas Hale. Before September had become October, Lydia Cartwright would know that those 4 words, "I can do all three," were the most straightforward promise any person had ever made her, and the first one in 2 years that was actually kept. They stood across the fence post from each other, the wind pulling at the hem of her dress, and she told herself to be practical. Sentiment was a luxury she had put away with Thomas's good coat. "I pay a fair wage," she said. "Not generous. Fair. Room is the tack room off the barn. It's dry, and it has a stove. Board is 2 meals a day. You work until the first hard freeze, and then we part ways. That is the arrangement." Jonas Hale looked at her the way a man looks at a map, straightforward, taking in the whole of it. "I don't drink," he said. "Don't gamble. I'll need Sundays off for church if there's one within riding distance. There is, 7 miles. Eli and I go every week. Then we agree." He did not ask about references or prior arrangements. She did not ask why he was walking north with a bedroll and no horse. There were things a person carried that were none of the other person's business. That was the unspoken first clause of every such agreement made on the frontier, and both of them understood it. She unlatched the gate. He came through. That was how it began. Eli saw him from the hayloft and scrambled down the ladder faster than she would have liked, and stood in the middle of the yard with his boots untied and his hair in his eyes, looking at Jonas Hale the way only a boy who had been without a man's company for 2 years could look at one. Like a plant turned toward a window. Lydia saw it and felt something tighten in her chest that she did not examine. "This is Eli," she said. "He knows the property better than I do. He'll show you the tack room." Jonas crouched down to the boy's level, not in a theatrical way, just so they were eye to eye. "I'm Jonas," he said. "I'll try not to get in your way." Eli considered this with great seriousness. "You can get in my way some," he said. "I don't mind." The first corners of something that might, in a different life, have been a smile moved at the edge of Jonas Hale's mouth. He straightened up, looked at Lydia once, and followed her son to the barn. The tack room was 12 feet by 10. Jonas had slept in worse. He had slept in far worse, in fact, and the small iron stove in the corner and the single window that looked out over the back pasture were almost luxuries by the measure of the last 3 years of his life. He did not dwell on those years. Dwelling was a practice that served no one on the frontier, where the next day's work had a way of demanding your full attention before the current day was finished. He unpacked his bedroll. He had a change of clothes, a Bible with a cracked spine, a good knife, and a small tintype photograph that he placed face down on the shelf without looking at it. That was the sum of Jonas Hale's portable life, and it fit in a bedroll, and he had made his peace with that. In the morning, he was at the fence line before Lydia came out to the porch with her first cup of coffee. She watched him work from a distance, not intending to watch, simply finding herself watching. He worked the way experienced men worked, without wasted motion. He tested each post before he committed to the repair, did not replace what could be mended, did not leave standing what needed replacing. By noon he had covered the whole south length and started on the west. Lydia brought him lunch at the fence line, because that was efficient. She did not bring it because she wanted to see him up close. She set the plate on the fence rail and said, "Noon," and he said, "Thank you, ma'am," and she went back to the kitchen. Eli brought him water twice. By the end of the first week, the south fence was tight. The wood was splitting at a rate that would fill the pile inside of 2 more weeks, and Jonas had located a soft spot in the barn foundation she had not known about. He told her about it at supper. She fed him at the table because the alternative was 2 separate fires and 2 separate trips, and practicality was its own kind of hospitality. "Back left corner of the barn," he said. "Ground underneath is spongy. It'll heave in the freeze and crack the sill. You'll want it packed and braced before October." She looked at him across the table. "Is that in the original arrangement?" "No," he said, "but it needs doing." She said nothing for a moment. Then, "Add it to your hours." He shook his head. "I'll do it on Sunday afternoon, after church." Lydia Cartwright looked at her soup and decided not to argue with a man who was offering free labor to protect her barn. That would have been foolish, and she was not a foolish woman. Eli, who had been very quiet through supper in the manner of children who are listening extremely hard, said, "Jonas, do you know how to whittle?" Jonas said, "I do." Eli said, "Papa used to whittle." The kitchen went quiet in the particular way kitchens go quiet when a child says a true thing that lands like a stone in still water. Lydia set her spoon down. Jonas did not look away from Eli, and he did not look toward Lydia for guidance, and somehow that was the right thing to do. "What did he make?" Jonas asked. Eli thought about it. Horses mostly, and one time a bird that looked like a horse. Something gentled in Jonas's expression. "I'll show you what I know," he said, "if your mother doesn't object." They both looked at Lydia. "After chores," she said, and picked up her spoon. That night, after Eli was in bed and the lamp was low, Lydia sat at the kitchen table with the household ledger and wrote down the week's expenses in her careful hand. Feed, lamp oil, flour, and then J. Hale, week 1, fair wage, work performed. She looked at what she had written. The fence was tight. The wood was growing. The barn would be braced. Her son had laughed at supper for the first time in longer than she could immediately recall. She closed the ledger and told herself, firmly, that this was a business arrangement. She told herself this twice, the way you repeat a word you aren't quite sure you've remembered correctly. October arrived the way it always does in southern Montana, on a diagonal, meaning the cold did not come straight down from the sky but sideways, through every gap in every wall and every poorly fitted window frame, as if the wind were looking for something it had left behind the previous winter. Lydia knew all the gaps in her house by name, more or less. She had stuffed them with rags and rope caulk and, in one case, a folded page from the 1887 almanac, and every autumn the cold found new ones she had missed. Jonas found them first. She did not ask him to. He simply appeared one morning on the ladder with a handful of oakum and a putty knife, moving methodically around the eaves of the main house, with the same unhurried competence he brought to every task. By the time she came outside to ask what he was doing, he was already halfway done. "Wind gaps," he said from the ladder. "House'll be warmer by 3 or 4 degrees, maybe more." She had been cold every October and November, and December and January for 2 years, and no one, including herself, had thought to do this particular thing. She stood in the yard looking up at him and felt something she identified, after a moment, as gratitude. Sharp and specific, the way real gratitude usually is. "I didn't put that in the arrangement," she said. "No," he agreed, and moved the ladder. The rye went in during the second week of October, Jonas and Eli working the rows together, while Lydia handled the seeding. Eli was earnest about his furrow depth, and consulted Jonas with the gravity of a much older person on points of technique. Jonas answered every question as if it had merit, which Lydia watched from behind and decided said something about a man's character. By the third week, the woodpile was full to the top of the shelter and beginning to overflow, and Jonas had begun a second stack along the south wall of the barn without being asked. Lydia had been going to mention it. She found she didn't need to. Eli had acquired a half-finished whittled horse and opinions about everything Jonas did, most of them enthusiastically positive. He had also begun sitting very close to Jonas at the supper table, close enough that Lydia had twice watched her son lean slightly against Jonas's arm while studying his plate, the unconscious drift of a child toward warmth. Each time, Jonas simply made room and went on eating. Lydia said nothing about it. She made a note of it in the ledger of herself, private and unwritten, and said nothing. What she did do was make a better supper. She told herself it was because the nights were cold and a working man needed more in cold weather. That was true. It was also true that she had not cooked with any real care since Thomas died, had made food that was sufficient and nourishing and nothing more, and that something in Jonas Hale's quiet and genuine thanks at each meal had reminded her that food was also a kind of offering, that a table spread with care was a way of saying, "You are worth this trouble." She made a venison stew with dried apples and rosemary she had kept from her summer garden. She made cornbread that rose properly. She made a Sunday pie with the last of the autumn pears. Jonas ate everything she put in front of him, with a careful attention that was not gluttony, but appreciation. The way a man eats who has spent enough time without to know what enough means. He said, the first time she made the stew, "This is very good, Mrs. Cartwright." And then, after a pause, "You're a fine cook." Lydia said, "I used to be. I've been getting back to it." He looked at her. "I'm glad," he said simply. She went back to the stove and stood with her back to him for a moment, because she was not sure what expression was on her face, and it was her private business. The external pressure arrived with November, the way trouble on the frontier tends to arrive, sideways, bundled up in something that looks ordinary. A man named Garrett Doyle came to the gate on a gray Thursday with a surveyor's pin in his hand and a letter from the Territorial Land Office in his coat pocket. He was representing a water company out of Helena that had been quietly acquiring deeds along the Bitterroot drainage, picking up parcels that had fallen behind on their filings. Thomas had filed every year. Lydia had filed the year after Thomas died. But the second year, the year she was managing, the filing had been late, 2 weeks late, and a land agent in Helena had noted the irregularity and flagged the parcel as potentially contested. Doyle was not a villain the way storybook villains are. He was polite and precise and smiled with his eyes closed, the way men smile when they are very certain of something. He explained the irregularity. He explained the company's position. He explained that Lydia had 30 days to produce a valid filing or appear before a land commissioner in Helena, or the parcel would be opened for a competing claim. He tipped his hat and left. Lydia stood in the yard after the gate closed and did not move for approximately the length of time it takes a person to understand that the ground they are standing on may not be theirs. Jonas had been at the barn. He came to stand beside her. He did not ask what Doyle had said because he had been within earshot and was not a man who pretended otherwise. "I have the original deed," she said. "Thomas registered it in '89. "The late filing is the problem," Jonas said. "I know." Her voice was steady. She had been practicing steadiness for 2 years, and it had become genuine. "I need to get to Helena. It's 4 days by wagon." "I know that too." She looked at the letter in her hand. "I can't leave the property for 4 days, not with winter coming on. And I can't take Eli on that road in November." Jonas was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was thinking rather than having nothing to say. The distinction was clear to her by now. "I can keep the property," he said. "I can keep Eli." She looked at him. "That's outside the arrangement," she said, but she said it carefully, not with the intention of closing the door. "It is," he agreed, "but it's inside what needs doing." Lydia looked at her 60 acres. The tight fence, the full wood pile, the rye in the ground, the barn braced against the freeze, all of it still here because of the man standing beside her. "He's never been in my care for more than a Sunday afternoon," she said. "Eli, I know." "He's easy," she said, and her voice did something she had not fully given it permission to do, went softer. "He's a good boy." "He is," Jonas said. She made the decision the way she made most decisions now, by looking at the facts, and then trusting what the facts pointed toward. "I'll be back inside of 6 days," she said. "I'll leave provisions for 8. All right? If anything happens, anything, there's a neighbor named Daltrey, 3 miles east. He's reliable." "All right." She looked at him one more time, this man she had hired off the road for 1 season, and realized that somewhere between the fence line and the supper table and the whittled horses and the quiet Sundays, she had begun to trust him with the things she could not afford to lose. She wasn't sure when that had happened. She was not sure it mattered when. "Thank you, Jonas," she said. He said, "Come back safe, Mrs. Cartwright." She left the following morning before dawn. The 6 days she was gone were long ones, and when she returned on the evening of the 6th day, cold through to the bone and carrying a validated filing stamped by a land commissioner in Helena, and a letter that told Garrett Doyle's water company that the Cartwright parcel was properly recorded and closed to competition, she came up the road in the last light and saw the main house windows glowing amber, and smoke rising from both chimneys, and Eli sitting on the porch wrapped in a quilt with Jonas beside him, both of them looking up at the stars in the manner of people who have identified a comfortable thing to do together. Eli saw her first and came off the porch at a full run and hit her at the knee, and she caught him and held him, the way you hold something you have been afraid to lose. "We had stew every night," he reported into her coat. "Jonas made it and it was good, but not as good as yours." She looked up from her son's head. Jonas was standing at the edge of the porch. The lamp behind him made it hard to see his face clearly, but she could see enough. "6 days," he said. "6 days," she confirmed. "The filing is stamped. The parcel is ours." Something moved in his expression. Relief, she thought. Genuine relief. The kind that has personal stakes in it. She carried Eli inside and fed them both from the cold provisions she had brought, and sat at the kitchen table while Jonas built the fire up high, and the warmth filled the room in that slow, certain way that warmth always does when a house is properly sealed against the wind. All of Jonas Hale's wind gaps, doing their work. She had been going to wait. She had told herself on the road home that she would wait, would be practical, would see the season through to its agreed end, before she said anything that changed the terms of the arrangement. But she sat at the table in the warm room and looked at Jonas adding wood to her fire, and Eli asleep already on the settle, worn out from 6 days of being an excellent child, and the word waiting seemed, suddenly, not accurate to the situation. "The arrangement ends at first hard freeze," she said. Jonas set the poker aside. "It does. Ground was frozen this morning when I left Helena." He was quiet. "I'm not prepared for you to leave," she said. It was not a romantic speech. It was Lydia Cartwright telling the truth in plain terms, which was the only kind of truth she knew how to tell. "The property needs more work come spring. Eli is—" She paused. "Eli is better with you here. And I—" Another pause, shorter. "I am also better." Jonas turned from the fireplace and looked at her. "I'm not a man with much to offer," he said. The words were quiet and direct, and she recognized the texture of them, the voice of someone who has rehearsed a difficult thing. "I've got what you see, a bedroll and a Bible and a good pair of hands. No land, no money set by. Nothing behind me I'm proud of except that I've worked hard and been honest." "What's behind you?" she asked. He did not deflect. "A marriage that failed," he said. "A woman who deserved better than a man who loved a bottle more than he loved her. I've been sober 4 years. I put it in the river and walked away and haven't looked back. But it's there. You ought to know it." Lydia looked at him. The fire popped. Eli breathed in his sleep. "Thomas died in a fence accident," she said. "I've been afraid of fence wire ever since. I send Eli away from the fence line when I work it. I know what it is to carry something." She folded her hands on the table. 4 years is a long way to walk." "It is," he said. "I'm not asking you to stay on the old arrangement," she said. "I'm asking you to consider a new one, different terms." His voice, when he answered, was careful and a little rough, the way voices get when they are carrying more than words. "What terms?" "You stay," she said. "You stay as a partner. On this property, at this table. With that boy," she met his eyes, "and with me." The kitchen was very still. "Lydia," he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. It came out like something he had been holding gently for a while, afraid to set down. "I'm not a woman who makes speeches," she said. "I'm a woman who kept 60 acres alive for 2 years on her own, and knows the difference between help and partnership. You are the second thing. I know what I'm asking." Jonas Hale crossed the kitchen. He did not move fast. He stopped beside the table and looked down at her, and she looked up at him, and the moment had the particular quality of moments that do not repeat, clear and lit, like the first frost on a window, something you know you are seeing for the only time. "I'll need to speak to Reverend Calloway," he said. "Before I stay is the thing you're describing." "So will I," she said. "Then yes," said Jonas Hale. "Different terms. All of them." Lydia Cartwright reached up and took his hand and held it, and did not let it go. Spring arrived late, the way it does in southern Montana, creeping in under the snow in the form of mud and a smell like iron and something green and patient. The rye came up in the south field, thin green lines in the dark earth, proof of work done in faith. The fence held. The barn did not heave. Reverend Calloway married them on a Saturday in March in the church 7 miles out, with Mrs. Halloran weeping in the front pew and Eli standing beside Jonas in a clean shirt, holding the ring with the gravity of someone who understood exactly how important his task was. After, when the small party had gone and the house was quiet in the blue dusk, Lydia found Jonas in the barn measuring something along the far wall. He had a piece of lumber propped and a pencil behind his ear. "What are you building?" she asked. "Shelf," he said. "Kitchen needs one more. You're running out of room for your jars." She looked at him, her husband, the man she had hired off the road 41 days before the first snow. "You've been thinking about that shelf for a while," she said. He looked at the wall. "Since about the second week." She said nothing more. She went back to the kitchen and began supper, and the sound of Jonas's measuring and the smell of wood smoke and the last cold light coming through the window that now had no gaps in it anywhere felt like the sum of everything she had ever meant by the word home. 2 days later, she opened the household ledger to record the spring seed costs and found a new entry in Eli's laborious, earnest handwriting in the column where she listed household members. It said, "Papa, Jonas Hale, here." She sat with the ledger for a long time. Outside, she could hear Eli telling Jonas something about the rye, very seriously, in the way he explained important things. She could hear Jonas answering, steady and unhurried and present. She closed the ledger. She pressed her hand flat against the cover. Then she went out to the south field to see how the rye was coming up, and to stand in the early spring sun beside the 2 people who were, without any further arrangement required, her family. There is something this story wants to say to you directly, and it is this: a home is not given. It is made, one act at a time, by people who show up and do the work and tell the truth and stay. Jonas Hale walked through a gate with a bedroll and a Bible, and 4 years of hard-won sobriety, and hands that knew how to mend what was broken. Lydia Cartwright opened the gate and kept the ledger honest and had the courage, when the season was ending, to offer new terms instead of goodbye. Between them, without anyone planning it, they built something that lasted. You never know when the person walking up your road is the answer to something you haven't yet figured out how to ask for. Keep your gate in good repair. Leave the lamp burning. If this story found its way to you tonight, we hope it warmed something. Leave us a comment and tell us, what is the bravest thing you think Lydia did in this story? Opening the gate, making the journey to Helena, or offering Jonas new terms? We would love to hear your thoughts, and if you'd like more journeys through the Old West, please subscribe and come along for the next one. Good night. God bless you, and God bless every home built by faithful hands.